everyone, welcome to Story Trading VIP special event. We have the CEO of DAIO joining us today, Anthony Ambrose. We'll get to him in just a second. First, a disclaimer: Story Trading is not an investment advisor. Investing in securities involves significant risk of loss. This event is being recorded. It will be provided to our paid members for a period of about 7 days, and then we'll be uploading this on YouTube next week. And there you can see the lovely Anthony Ambrose. Before we bring him on, just a couple of housekeeping notes. It's NASDAQ, ticker symbol DAIO. Last trade, $3.91, 34 million market cap. Shout out to Matthew Winthrop, Equitable Advisors, for hooking me up with the company and with Jordan Darrow and Associates to help make this event happen. I will say one quick little preview about the company. The reason I brought them on, I did see Q3. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, but Q3, we had 10 cents net income, 11 million cash, no debt, with a little 34 million market cap. So it sounded interesting. And here's the chart. And you know what we do at Story Trading? We look at that chart, we do our research by talking to CEOs, by doing our due diligence, and we look at the 4 pillars. That's sentiment, catalysts, fundamentals, and technicals. So part of this process here, talking with the CEO, we'll learn about the fundamentals of the company, and that'll help us understand the big picture about what DAIO is all about. Will help us understand the history of the chart and where the stock might go in the future. So with that, I want to welcome Anthony Ambrose here to the screen. Anthony, you there?
I am here, Ben. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thanks for joining me. So this is a new company to our community. Many times, most of the time, I should say, when we invite a CEO, it's a company that we've known well, that people in our community have researched, and we bring the CEO for more information. So this is a totally new name to our community. So I want to take the chance for you to open this up to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, when you joined the company and what's changed since you joined the company, just so we can get to know you a little bit better, and then we'll get a little bit more into the business after that.
Sure, that sounds great, Ben. So I've been CEO at DAIO just a little bit over 10 years. I joined at the end of 2012, came in to really take a look at the product strategy and figure out where we needed to go with the programming business. As you know, we build programming systems. We put the firmware into products as they're being built in manufacturing lines. And the company had come from a wireless background. We're doing a lot of work with mobile phone players. And we could tell that needed to be updated, because we had a great relationship with companies like RIM and LG, but they weren't winning in the phone business. And so I came on, we came up with a strategy we called automotive first, which meant that we were going to pivot our product design activities and our market development activities towards automotive, away from more general wireless and consumer. And I've been a product guy for my whole career. I started out at Intel, 23 years at Intel, several years at a company called Radisys, and I did some consulting for a while. And so we really wanted to make sure we got the product right for that automotive market. And we hit a home run in 2016, 2017, when we won about a $10 million contract with Bosch, one of the leading tier 1 suppliers in automotive. And that really validated our strategy in automotive. And today we've got several hundred systems providing production capacity to put firmware into chips for the automotive market.
Okay, so I just want to go back to when you came on board. If 2012, right? 2012. Okay, so if you can speak without really talking about the product from like a management perspective, what was the opportunity? What problem were you trying to solve as CEO? And in those 10 years, if you can kind of sum it up, like, has it met your expectations? What, like, has it been more challenging than you thought? Just kind of very high level from a management perspective. I'd love to hear about your experience.
So when I came on, the company had a good business in the core, but we were trying to do way too many things for a company our size. We had good people, but they were trying to do 10 things when they really needed to be doing 1 or 2 things really well. And so the product roadmap, I stopped us from doing some strange things. We'd acquired a company doing FPGA design tools and said, no, that's not really such a great idea. we didn't have critical mass there, so I shut that down in my first quarter. Went to the board and said, look, we really need to be focusing on our products. And so that was the initial, why am I here moment, is to get the product line right. That went pretty much as I expected until, as I mentioned earlier, we decided, in addition to getting the product right, we needed to be in the automotive market, not the wireless market. When you say what didn't go right, I had a conversation with someone after the financial crisis of 2008, and we kind of joked and said, boy, aren't you glad you never have to worry about anything happening that bad again in your managerial career? Surviving the financial crisis. And of course, then we got COVID. And, you think about it, and everyone thinks about their own personal items, all right, how do I stay healthy? How do I keep my family healthy? But when you run a company with people on, Germany, the United States, China, all over the world, COVID is a gut check. All right. And so what we learned was, if you start with the premise of taking care of your people and making sure they're feeling as good as they can possibly feel during these crazy times, you're in a much better position to take care of your customers. So we set up a strategy where we said, look, let's go back to our core values. We need you to take care of yourself and your family. All right. We need you to take care of the plant, our manufacturing location. In other words, don't bring COVID into the plant. Don't get everybody sick. We have things to do. And we stayed open pretty much the entire time in the US. And then the third part is make sure we're serving our customers, because we had customers that were deemed, critical customers. Obviously, we're in the automotive space. We have some other key customers as well. And so, the COVID gut check was a big one. We didn't lay anybody off. Okay, we didn't take any PPP money. It was just a very interesting experience on a personal level and a professional level to go through that. And I think, I think we did it right. Big picture.
Okay. All right. Good. Good to hear. I'm going to get into your products in just one second, but now I want to ask you, going forward as CEO of this company, Anthony, what are the remaining big challenges, again, almost from a managerial perspective, to inflect this company to the next level? Are we there yet? Is there something else that you need to do organizationally wise, or, are we there? Is it just a matter of the product and executing on selling at this point?
I think it's always, you always have to worry about product. You always have to worry about the market. I mean, you're never in a business, certainly not a company our size that's public, that can just say, oh, everything's going to be fine on product. We've got to listen to our customers. We've got to stay ahead. And for us, we have a very high R&D budget. It's 25% of our revenue. And so we better be continuing to come up with really good products, because we're spending a pile of money on R&D. The capabilities we have in automotive are second to none. We just announced some new products where we increased the performance of our programmers by about a factor of 4. Okay, and it's some really cool stuff. We got some patents out there on that. But at the end of the day, you always have to be listening to customers and staying aware of products, what the semiconductor guys are doing, how they're going to impact your business. You have to be very nimble, right? We're a $25 million roughly revenue company, and we program parts that are built by companies that have tens of billions of dollars in market cap. They're going to do what they need to do for themselves. Our customers tend to be pretty big, and so we have to be nimble to make sure we're doing everything possible to meet those needs. So there's always that product diligence. At the same time, right, we're still dealing with the echoes of, I call it the ringing from the big pop we had with COVID, mostly supply chain related, right? The automotive customers said, no, we don't need any parts. No, we need a lot more parts. And it's getting a lot better, but it's still something we have to pay attention to. The flip side of that, however, is when you look at what's going on with governments, right? They're trying to reshore product to the United States, especially in the industrial sector. So we've had a number of customers come to us and say, look, we need to have DAIO equipment. Maybe we had a plant overseas. Now we need to have the capacity in the United States. We're building clean energy. We're doing other industrial things that are going to benefit from recent legislation. And so that's giving us some unexpected things that are, positive. But when you're our size, even though we're the market leader in our business, you always have to be very, very nimble. That's probably the biggest thing that I would point out. How do you manage a company? You better be nimble.
Okay. All right, great. Now I want to move into a little more detail about the product. If I may, I'm going to share this screen real quick from your website. So I'm trying to figure out what you guys do, and everyone can go read this on their own. This is very short, so I'll read it. It says DAIO is the leading global provider of advanced data and security programming solutions for flash memory-based intelligent devices and microcontrollers for automotive, Internet of Things, medical, wireless, consumer electronics, industrial controls, and other markets. Customers use DAIO's programming solutions to reliably, securely, and cost-effectively bring innovative new products to life. Now, I'm hearing a lot of automotive. I've seen it in your press releases. I've seen it in the conference call transcript that there's a big move towards automotive. But, I'm looking at this website, then I see solutions, and I see all of these different products, automated programming, security provisioning, manual programming. This is all over my head. I look at this, and I have, as a layman, a little difficulty understanding what it is you guys actually do. Can you simplify it for me as someone
Sure.
who doesn't understand the technology? What do you guys do? What's your advantage? What's your product competitive advantage that you offer? What's your product?
So if you look at any electronic device, okay, what you do is you take a chip and you put other chips there and you solder it down onto a board, and that board becomes the guts of your electronic device. To make that product come to life, you need to put the initial load of software into that product. And it could be a mobile phone, it could be an automotive infotainment system, it could be a number of different things. And so we build systems that take the customer's firmware image that their engineering team has created, and we put that into those boards, the chips that go into the boards in the manufacturing cycle. Okay, so that initial load of firmware, the programming, and this has been going on for 50 years. Okay, this is something that's necessary to have any semiconductor-based product, if you will, come to life. You got to tell it what to do. And so we've been doing that, and we've been doing it and focusing on manufacturing for the last 20, 25 years or so.
Okay, and so is there, can you tell me, you've been talking about this shift to automotive. Is that in relation to electric vehicles or?
Yeah, EV is part of it, but it's not just EV, Ben. Think about a car you drove 10 years ago, okay? Really nice performance car. You get in, you sit behind the wheel, and you turn on the car, and two needles move up and down. They're analog on your speedometer and odometer, right? Or tachometer, rather. And now you get into a car, same experience, you turn it on, and those needles aren't moving. They're a graphical representation. It's almost a computer-generated image of a tachometer and a speedometer there, all right? So it's become, if you will, a digital computer on your instrument screen where it used to be analog devices, okay? So when you say electronic programming, that simple instrument cluster has about 10,000 times more data that needs to be put into it than the analog needle version that we talked about 10 years ago, okay? So everyone has driven a car or has sat in a car and can understand it's the same car, still has 4 tires, has a steering wheel, gas pedal, but the instrumentation that controls the car, that informs the driver, has shifted completely from analog to digital. And that has enormous implications for programming. As I mentioned earlier, if you program 30, 40, 50 gigabytes of information into an instrument cluster, including your mapping, your infotainment, et cetera, that's 5 orders of magnitude bigger than what you had before. And that's helped stimulate a lot of the demand we've seen in automotive. Does that help?
Can I interject for a second?
It helps. Yep, go ahead.
So I sort of agree with Ben. I'm trying to say, system on a chip. Are you selling a hardware device that allows them to integrate? Are you selling a licensing software? So the whoever Micron makes the chip, they physically send chips to you guys and you put systems on them. I'm not quite understanding.
Oh, sure. So,
how you're at channel.
yeah, the programmer itself is an FPGA-based computer, okay? And we surround that with an automated handler so the chips can move in and out of the programmer real fast. And so we sell a piece of equipment and software, okay, and consumables that go with that, because every time you put a chip in and out, you wear out some sockets, which are part of the consumables. And then customers also come to us for upgrades. A machine they bought 10 years ago, they may want to upgrade it to the latest technology, and we can offer that to them as well. So most of our business, we sell equipment, we sell consumables, and we sell software.
How much
We have a growing part of our business.
How much does a unit
has? Go ahead, Matthew.
I'm sorry. What's roughly how much does a unit cost like this?
So a typical unit would sell for about $250,000.
So out of 7.2, how many units did you sell during that quarter? And I remember reading. So
we sell about 55 units of our automated handlers during the year.
And what's your capacity if business really kicked ass?
We could easily double that with our factory as it is.
Okay, thanks. I'm trying to get my so primarily it's you're a chip equipment. You're an applied material as a Teradyne or
those guys sell to the semiconductor wafer fabrication plants. We sell to something that's downstream. It's called an SMT line. So the people for example, a lot of the auto tier ones have their own factories, or you heard of companies like Foxconn or Flextronics or Jabil or Sanmina. These are people that are contract manufacturers. They have these big lines where they take chips, put them on board, solder them down, run them through and test them. So that's people that have factories that build SMT lines are our primary customers.
Got it, thanks. Sorry, Ben, take it over. I was just trying to clarify.
No, that's helpful. Glad you jumped in there. Okay, so let me get in a better idea of the technology. It's going to take me a while, because this is not my area of expertise. Might take me a few weeks, Anthony, and a couple follow-up phone calls at some point, but we'll get there. So just want to ask you if I noticed 90% of your revenue is international. I was wondering if you could speak to that. Do you not have a competitive edge here in the States, or why is it all international?
We have a very strong international business because we've been a global company for a long time. And remember, if we're selling to SMT lines, we go where the SMT lines are. Okay. And for about the last 30 years, they've been moving anywhere but the USA, with some exceptions. So we're very strong in Germany. We're very strong in Europe, in the automotive industry in Europe. We're strong in Asia, all aspects of Asia, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Japan, India, because all these places have SMT lines. Okay, they all want to build their own products. Mexico has been a booming part of that for us as well. And Mexico services the US market quite a bit, especially in automotive. So technically it's an international sale, but the capacity there is really servicing the US market.
Okay, all right, got it. I want to move into Q3 results here. It was a very good quarter for you sequentially, year over year. It was probably the best quarter in a few years. You had 10-cent EPS. And I want to understand, is that quantitative bump we saw in Q3, is that reflective of an inflection point in the company, or is that just kind of like catching up with the COVID situation? It looked like you had a lot of commentary there that you did catch up on a lot of the supply chain issues with COVID in Q3. So can you characterize this last quarter for us? Was it really more about just a one-time catch-up, or is there something fundamentally happening in the business that this might be the beginning of?
Yeah, Ben, I think it's a little bit of both. Going into the third quarter, we knew we had some catch-up demand because there was a lot of supply chain issues, especially related to the lockdowns that happened in China in the first part of the year. We knew we were going to catch up in Q3 going into the quarter. But during the quarter, the booking demand was a lot stronger than we'd anticipated in our own internal forecasts. It was automotive, it was industrial, and it was pretty strong worldwide. So we knew going into Q3 we're going to get a pop, just sort of getting back to normal. But then it also had a strong bookings aspect to it that was not in any way related to catching up. So a little bit of both, catching up and also seeing good strength across the board in automotive, industrial, and as I mentioned, people want the programming equipment, in part because semiconductor shortages are getting better, in part because people are trying to get more and more capacity into the US, and more and more digitization, more and more semiconductor content going everywhere.
Okay, so what is your top product or top industry that's going to be like a inflection point for you? I mean, I'm hearing a lot about automotive. Is
Yeah.
that where it's at? You're forecasting a lot of big growth in automotive, or is there any other areas that you're expecting to be inflecting for you here?
We love automotive. It's about 60% of our business, and between automotive and industrial, those are our two biggest markets. We love automotive because more and more silicon content is going in every car. Okay, now you can have years where units go up, years where units are flat, but if you look at the trajectories of silicon content going into cars, you talk to people like McKinsey or Cowen or any of the big semiconductor companies that are focusing on automotive, more and more silicon content is going into cars to do the things I described earlier: the instrument cluster, infotainment systems, electrification. There's another category called advanced driver assist, or think of it as active safety, where you see all these sensors going into cars. Now you buy a car, you have a sensor that tells you you're driving too closely to the car in front of you. You have a sensor that helps you park. In fact, you can even park, some cars even park themselves using those sensors. You have lane departure sensors. All of these technologies need to have systems that get programmed. And so that's what's driving the demand, no pun intended, for programming systems in automotive. It's just simply more parts that need to be programmed. And because DAIO is the incumbent, we're already in the vast majority of the tier one auto electronics companies. It's natural for us to get more and more business as these companies grow. So that's why we like automotive. It's a very simple long-term play on more and more semiconductor content going into cars. That semiconductor content needs programming. DAIO is the leader in automotive programming, so we're going to benefit as customers add capacity.
Okay, I got it. So is your end customer, are you contracted directly with the car manufacturer or with the who's your customer?
So the customer for us is what they call the tier one. So it'd be somebody like a Bosch or a Visteon or a Borg Warner or an Aptiv, these names of the leading electronics suppliers that build systems, subsystems that go into cars, and they would sell to people like Ford and GM and the like.
Got it. And I have some questions. If anyone has questions, you can direct message them to me or put it in the public chat, but I have some being DM'd to me. Does this shift to EVs mean more business for you, or the same as ICEs?
The shift to EVs is more business for us for a couple of reasons. There are a lot of complex systems that go into an EV, even if it's a pure 100% electric vehicle. But a lot of times you're also seeing cars that are electric and have some sort of internal combustion engine that goes with it. A plug-in hybrid, a regular hybrid. These things are enormously complex, and that additional complexity generates opportunities for us. So electrification is good for us on multiple levels.
Okay, got it.
Can I?
So I want. Go ahead,
sorry,
man.
can I hop back in for a second?
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Ambrose, it sounds like everything's honking, and then a client asked me, because I like the stock, I've been working it. You've been in business for 50 years, and we're starting to honk here a little bit. 7 million sounds like a small amount of revenue for everything you're doing. And when you say you're a leader in this industry, and I think of how many cars there are on the road that would be high end, that would need specialized chips and would benefit from their wholesaler using your product. What am I missing? That shouldn't this be a $50-100 million business, or is it's so specialized it's not that large, but it's going to be solid? What's your
No, it's a really good question, Matthew. So a couple things. So let's look at a customer. They buy a piece of DAIO, a system from us. The useful life of that is 10 years, okay? So they put in their factory, they can run that piece of equipment for 10 years. So what they'll do over that time is they'll buy consumables from us, because the use of the system wears out some of the sockets that are needed to hold the parts while they're being programmed. And so from our standpoint, what we're trying to do is continue to build up that installed base, so more and more of the business becomes recurring. Because the system lasts forever, you're not going to buy it and throw it away. So you might spend $250,000 this year on a system, and then you'll spend, 1/10 of that on consumables every year. And so the total mix for our business is becoming more and more balanced between the consumables and software and the capital equipment sale. I'll give you a good example. So 2016, 2017, we were about 2/3 of our revenue was capital equipment sale. 1/3 being consumables and software. We're at a point now where it's closer to 56% capital and 44% consumables and software.
So what's the installed base that you're working upon?
Yeah, so let me get to that in a second. Longer term, we think we get to 50-50. We look at our installed base of everything that we've done since about 2013, 2014. We call it our PSV family or generation of products. We have about 430 of those that we have sold since 2014. Okay, and as I said, we put about 55 systems out a year. So you can see the installed base grows every year, which drives consumable revenue, which drives software revenue. You sell an additional number of systems every year. You go find new customers. That's how the business grows.
Got it. Thanks.
Matthew started getting into a category I was going to talk about, so perfect transition. I wanted you to be able to speak a little more to TAM, and not just like the industry TAM, but the specific TAM that you guys are after. Like I don't know where you guys are at, like 7 million a quarter now, 28 million a year roughly. Is that right? So like, given the product mix that you have now, how much further do you think you could grow? What's the TAM you're looking for? I don't know, 2-3 years out from now. What do you?
Well, I think the important thing to remember about the total available market is there are basically 3 ways to do programming. You can have the semiconductor supplier do it for you. And in the old days, they used to do a lot of that for customers. You can do programming at the chip level, which is how we do it. It's called pre-programming or chip level programming. And we think that TAM is, $75 to $100 million a year, all in. And then there's also programming at the end of the line. After you put a board together, you can program parts. Usually that's reserved for parts that have not so much code. So for us, the TAM expansion is to continue to grow faster than the market in automotive, and also look at interesting ways where we can maybe add additional technology to our portfolio.
Okay. That TAM that you spoke of, we say 80 to 100 million for direct programming of the chips.
Correct.
That's a TAM. Is that like a whole industry TAM, or your addressable TAM that your company has, inroads to get penetration?
That would be the TAM for data programming for chip level programming. Now, I mentioned there are 3 different ways to do it. Within chip level programming, there's also a significant TAM expansion by adding security capability to the product. Okay, everything I mentioned up till now is data only programming. In addition to data, we can put security information, keys, certificates, things like that create a cryptographic identity for semiconductors. Now, what that means practically is Think about it when you're doing a web browsing and you go to your bank or a travel agent, and the web indicator switches from a standard indicator to one that has a little lock on it. Okay, because now you're in a situation where you've done a cryptographic exchange with that site to make sure it's now secure. The same principle applies to how do I want to secure a chip to protect my firmware or protect the identity of that chip? And why is that important? Well, if you think about it, a lot of devices like Internet of Things devices are out there in the middle of nowhere they could be physically compromised, they could be hacked. And you need to protect those devices with a strong identity. And that's beyond just putting data into a place on the chip. You have to use PKI or other encryption techniques that essentially give that chip a unique identity that cannot be easily copied or hacked. So when you say TAM expansion, what we've done with our systems is go beyond data programming to the secure provisioning. We call it our Centrics platform, and you highlighted it earlier on the website. Centrics does everything that a data programming machine does, but it also has the capability using an HSM, which is a fancy term for a black box that holds keys, to put keys and certificates onto semiconductors, lock them down, and make sure they can't be hacked or counterfeited down the road. Okay, and so that market is a significant TAM expansion. You have about 25 to 30 billion units a year of microcontrollers that get programmed. And eventually that market's going to be all secure micros. So that's an interesting TAM expansion for us around new product capabilities with Centrics.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot about Centrics. I saw the analysts were talking about it, and someone from our community who was familiar with your company said, ask about Centrics. So why is Centrics so important? Are these financially, are they more profitable for your company? Or it sounds like you're saying there's a bigger TAM with Centrics. I did notice in your last conference call, you mentioned that there was one big customer going to production in Asia, and you're working on a number of interesting deals that I hope to discuss, that you hope to discuss more in our next call. So can you speak to a little bit more about why is everyone so interested in Centrics here?
Well, I think people are interested in Centrics for the reasons I described, that it's a significant expansion of the market, but also it serves a real need in the industry to fix a problem where people are building systems for IoT devices and other things that are just not secure enough. And there are horror stories of security cameras that are insecure that have been hacked, other things where if you're going to make an investment in something like an IoT device, you need to make sure that the data that's coming off that device are the real data. Otherwise, it's sort of pointless to put a device in operation. But you also need to have a secure way to update firmware, and in doing so, protect your intellectual property. So this whole concept of creating a much more secure infrastructure for your home, digital thermostats, digital cameras, ring bells, door cameras, things like that. How to make sure that when you put those in, they can't be hacked, they can't be taken over. Centrics is a way for customers to give those devices strong identity, to give them an ability to put them, the public keys and things like that onto a cloud for later management, and ultimately make it a much more compelling product from a security standpoint.
So how impactful, since you called it out in the conference call, this one large OEM customer going to production with Centrics, how impactful is that to your revenue? Like, can you give us an idea, kind of like what % of your revenue represented this one?
Yeah,
this
we
one
include Centrics in that software and services piece, which is about 12, 13% of our revenue overall. Now, that's not all Centrics, okay? It includes a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. But the reason I called out the customer going to production is that that customer were on a recurring revenue contract where, as they provision the part, we get a pay per use fee per part from that customer. We're doing some more things like that with Centrics, between pay per use, other licenses that generate a bit more recurring revenue than our normal business. And so we like that longer term because, again, it gets us more recurring revenue and balances that, towards a 50-50 mix that I alluded to earlier. We want to have Centrics be a bigger and bigger part of our business. We have great technology. We've got validation from critical customers. The big challenge for me and for the team is to go off and find and engage customers in a way that allows us to find and close more deals. That's probably the biggest single thing. If you go back to one of your earlier questions, what's the challenge for the team? What do you have to worry about? That's probably the biggest single thing where we're still figuring out best practices in that area.
Okay. Can you give us a little more color behind when you say interesting deals? You're working on a number of interesting deals. I mean, what do you mean by interesting? You're just talking about closing more deals, or something more interesting than just
an interesting deal for us in Centrics is one where, for example, we could be working with an OEM in a new category, okay? Or it's very important for us to be working with semiconductor partners on generating leads for Centrics and security. So I don't want to be vague on the call here, but I'll say more what interesting looks like. Stay tuned to our earnings call probably in February, and I'll be able to elaborate a bit more on that. But I call it out because unlike data programming, which is something that's extremely well understood, as I mentioned, it's been around for decades. Security provisioning is something that's new, and we're still trying to understand the best way to work with semiconductor providers, OEMs, and their partners to get this right from a market development and go-to-market strategy.
Okay, great. I got like a bunch of questions rolling into my DM, so I'll try to get to them all. But let me go back to this Q3. I really want to understand where we are. You guys gave a little bit of some sort of guidance for Q4, saying that at least you're going to fill most of your backlog plus deferred revenue. So the 7.2 million you had in Q3 translating to 10 cents per share. Are you at a point where, was that an anomaly that quarter, or do you think you're going to be able to sustain that level of revenue and earnings throughout the next several quarters? Any color you can give on that?
Yeah, so first of all, we don't give quarterly guidance because it's pretty lumpy for us quarter to quarter. But let's go back to the question you asked me 10, 15 minutes ago about, was it a catch-up quarter or were you excited about the new business? I told you it was a little bit of both. So the reason I talked about the backlog and the deferred revenue is that's our highest backlog that we've had in quite some time. All right. So high backlog is probably the single biggest indicator of what's going to happen in the following quarter. Okay. And I just want to remind people that it is our intent to ship all that stuff, or the vast majority of the backlog, in the subsequent quarter. Okay. So we don't give guidance, but I wanted to make sure people understood that we had a really strong backlog. The second piece of it was, I think, commentary around, bookings momentum coming out of Q3, the state of our funnel, other things like that. And what could drive that was, again, better performance from semiconductor companies around less shortages for automotive parts, things like that. So that was the color I'm trying to create with our Q3 commentary, to be clear about a high backlog is good for business, and we had very good momentum on our bookings coming out of that quarter.
Okay, and can you just clarify the impact that the strong US dollar has been having on your revenue and earnings? Has that been a positive or a negative for you here?
No, strong US dollar has been very much a headwind for us. We would have had some even better numbers if the dollar had been anywhere near where it had been at the beginning of the year, especially in Q3. The dollar was down almost 15% versus the euro. It went from $1.15. I think it bottomed out at 98 cents or thereabouts. I think it's popped back up a bit. I didn't check it today, but it's a $1.03, $1.04 range, which is better. but still down 10% from a year ago. There's also some impact from other currencies. The dollar is strong not only against the euro, but against pretty much every other currency in the world. And this is something we just have to deal with. As I mentioned earlier, you mentioned earlier, 90% international sales. Even if the sales are transacted in US dollars, ultimately consumers in those countries pay for what's going on in their local currency. So where we are now, if Q3 was the bottom from a strong dollar standpoint, anything that's better, anything where the dollar weakens from 98 euro cents to now $1.04 is going to be a benefit for us. And if you look at it on an annual basis, we think, a 15% drop in the dollar was $750,000 impact to revenue and gross margin. So it's meaningful.
Okay. All right. Got it. Man, I have a lot of DMs here. There's man, I don't know which one of them. There's two people labeled iPhone, and one of you is sending me all these questions about firmware. If you don't mind, it'll be easier if Tony. I thought that was you, Tony. All right. Yes, I thought you that was your kind of question. Tony, are you available to unmute yourself and ask your question directly? That would be great. All right. While we wait for Tony, when you're ready, you could just go and unmute yourself. I'll try to ask your question later. I'm not quite sure, but here's another question. Why doesn't EV and auto complexity with hundreds of new devices lead to commensurately higher demand for his machines or consumables, which should wear out after use?
So we think that complexity is a real strong demand driver. You're talking about McKinsey saying that semiconductor content will triple over a decade. We think that's incredibly bullish. Again, I go back to, we have installed base in our customer base. It's very positive for us because it means we have a much higher likelihood of getting the next system order as they need more capacity. But it also means that, not every new design requires purchase of a new system. It does require purchase of adapters, the things that connect the part itself to the programming engine, the consumables that we've been talking about, but it may not necessarily trigger a new capital investment. But it's still very, very bullish for growth.
Okay. I think I got Tony now. Tony, you there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Go ahead. You had a bunch of comments about the firmware you wanted to ask.
Yeah. So to all my fellow colleagues, just to clarify, if I get this correct, your focus, Anthony, your company's focal point is programming that goes at the CPU and board or motherboard type of level, correct? And then that talks to the operating system, GUI, and your guys' specialty is providing security at the CPU firmware, motherboard, chip, or board level. Is that pretty fair to say that that's what you guys focus on?
You got a lot of that right. Let me maybe calibrate it a little bit. Firmware is that initial load of software that you correctly characterize, and every subsequent load of software, whether it's an OS or something like that, builds on firmware. But when you mentioned CPU, we really focus on technologies. Sometimes it's a CPU, but also it's big flash memory that goes next to a CPU, or flash memory that's embedded into a chip that's called a microcontroller. And so, like I said, you got most of it right, but I just had to clarify those couple of points.
Okay. Now, your machine, it's a very hefty, large machine. Is your machine, is it a large mass kind of production, high volume for stamping, so to speak, quote unquote, firmware into these specific hardware chips, motherboards, or does it write into specific solid state memory? What does that big machine do?
Yeah, sure. So the big machine, the reason it's a big machine is you have a programming engine. Okay, and we can take one programming engine and stack them up about, I think our maximum that typically have is a dozen. We could go higher, but I think that's the practical limit. And then if you've got all those programmers sitting there, you want to have an automated handler that picks up the part and puts it into the programmer, okay? A person couldn't do it that quickly. And a person would probably bend leads, or they'd have lower quality. And so take your programming engine, stack a bunch of them together, put a robot on there that moves the parts in and out really quickly.
Right.
Okay? And that's the core function of what we do.
I see. So the machine is the bridge between the code and the actual hardware, correct?
You got it.
Basically.
You got it.
That's what you guys do. I see. Oh, wow. Now, do you guys specialize in specific, is your specialty specific types of CPUs, boards, or flash memories, or is the machine very flexible?
It's a really good question, Tony. The machine itself is inherently flexible. We could program 100,000 different kinds of chips, okay? The reality is the customer base
Are we talking about, Anthony, I hate to interrupt you. Are we talking about just simple input output, like chips that go into like toasters or remote controls and TVs, or can this be at the level of, let's say, a computer chip like an AMD chip, or I don't know, we'll take it even further way out there, like Apple's M1 or M2 chip. Can you guys do stuff like that?
Exactly. The flexibility spans an enormous range of complexity, okay? Anything that has memory, in theory, we can program. So most devices...
And as far as the dimensions that go into the machine physically, as far as physical width, length, weight, how can that machine, I mean, typically in the markets, things are pretty small, right? So that machine could pretty much deal with anything that you guys put in there, even like, let's say, a computer, a motherboard?
So not a motherboard, but for example, if you look at our machines, the practical spec is about 1.5 millimeters to 42 millimeters. Okay. So think of something that you would have a real hard time holding on to, a real small chip, up to something that's, the size of your thumbnail. Okay.
So that's the range. That's the physical range that you can literally have the machine. And what is like the, let's say my thumb, what would be the rate at which it could actually imprint code onto a chip that's about my thumb size? What is the rate?
So the speed of the programming, the handler can operate at about 2,000 parts an hour. Okay. Now, if you have a long programming time, you may find yourself in a situation where the machine is delivering a throughput of, let's say, 200 parts an hour.
Got it. Okay.
And I'll give you an example. So if you have a big auto infotainment application, that might be 50 gigabytes of code. Right. It's a huge amount of code. Yeah. And so a customer would have 10 or 12 of our programming engines, each of them holding 8 silicon chips. So you got about 100 chips in the machine at any one time cooking.
Got it.
Okay. And you load up one programmer, then you load up a second, load up the third while the first one's programming. Then the first one gets done, you unload it, you reload it. By then the second programmer's done, you unload it, reload it, et cetera, et cetera. So the parallelism is how you get the throughput. It's extremely flexible, but it's something that's really well understood in the industry. So we can have a conversation in about a minute with a customer. How many parts are you running a year? What's the code size? What's the type of? And then we can go size that demand for the customer pretty easily.
You guys can mod your machine, or is it just plug and play, or how does that? Or do you guys mod it for each client, or is it pretty much?
Yeah. So for example, some clients will say, "Hey, I need a whole bunch of programmers because I'm an infotainment company, and give me 12 programmers, and that machine's going to cost a lot more than $250,000." We have some other customers going, "Hey, you know what? I'm starting up a new line here in the United States. My volume is small initially, but I want to be able to grow. Maybe they only want one programmer to start, but they know they want to have the ability to scale up to 5 or 6 once they get into full production. So what our sales team does is quickly get to the customer, as I said, what's your volume? What's the code size? How many chips are you running? And or what chip are you running? And then we can come in and make a recommendation on the type of system. We have small, medium, and large, how many programmers. And then some people want to do other things, after they program. Sometimes they want to mark the device. Sometimes they want to do other things. But, at the end of the day, it's a consultative sale process to make sure the customer gets exactly what they need and gets a good value.
Anthony, I'm looking at these look like movie reels on Centrics. Are those magnetic strips, or is that like a mechanical pulley that's just kind of working around to kind of pull things, a physical? I don't know.
Are you talking about something that is moving the robot? I'm sorry, I'm not looking.
I'm looking at it says embedded award. I'm looking at I believe it's Centrics.
Okay.
I clicked on Centrics, and there's the big machine.
Correct.
It's got a little monitor hanging on the side. It's got two, three that look like movie reels.
Oh, sure. Those are if I understand right, semiconductor parts come one of two ways. They come in tape and reel, which looks like a movie reel. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So it unwinds just like movie film. Okay, except there are parts in there. And then we take the parts out. That thing on the left there, that's tape and reel. There you go.
Okay. So one of these is the actual item that you are imprinting on, right?
Yeah. So parts come in on the tape and reel. We take them out. We put them in the programmer. Okay. We program them, and then we take them back out and put them back in the tape and reel. In this case. Okay.
To package them back up. Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And so what happens after that? That tape and reel goes from our machine over to an SMT line. Okay. For a pick and place robot, we'll put it on the board where it's supposed to go. And so from a manufacturing standpoint, it's pretty slick stuff.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And you guys have that machine as well that you guys sell, or that you lease, or two separate machines, right? The SMT machine.
Yeah. So an SMT line would be made by somebody else.
Oh,
but every time they put a line in, it creates more demand for programming.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm looking at all your stuff here. You guys, that's pretty neat. Okay, so I think I kind of, and I'm sure this discussion was really helpful to all of us as far as having a really good idea as to the nitty-gritty, the basics as to what DAIO does. And it's pretty cool. I think I'm done. Oh, as far as clients, do you guys work with Department of Defense? Do you guys work with Apple, Tesla, or any companies that we would be very familiar with, or are you under NDA? I don't know. Yeah.
We have a couple of customers that you'd really like to know about, but we're under NDA.
Okay.
But they're really cool. Okay. I got to tell you that.
Right
Tesla, through their manufacturing partners, is a customer of ours.
Right
they
on.
outsource a lot of electronics demand. Pretty much anyone in the automotive space. I said this once before, and I was talking to my team, and I said, I don't think you can buy a car in a major market that doesn't have DAIO content in it.
Wow. Yeah.
In other words, you'd be hard pressed. I'm talking about a kit car somewhere they build 12 a year. I'm talking about something, is marketed and sold as a volume automobile in the United States, Western Europe, Japan, China, India, etc.
Right. No,
I don't know of a car you can buy that doesn't have DAIO somewhere.
Right. Now, as far as the TAM, as what Ben was asking and talking about, that potentially could be pretty much any electronic gadget, since we're going electrical, and things are just increasing with as far as chip usage. That is your market, right? That is just more funneling towards you, because pretty much everything has a chip in it, and that you guys, that is your TAM, or do you guys focus and specialize on one specific sector
No,
of that market? Yeah.
you're technically correct that we can program any device, and pretty much anything with electronics is an opportunity. As a practical matter, if you have a real small amount of code in your device,
Mhm.
it's often easier to wait to the end of the line and put that program code in while you're doing something like board test.
Mhm.
Okay. And we get a lot of demand when people suddenly realize that they can't program that anymore at the end of the line without slowing down their tester. And so they say, all right, we'll program it ahead of time. So I mentioned earlier, there are 3 different ways to program: with the semi-house, with DAIO technology, or at the end of the line.
Mhm.
And so there's this constant back and forth. We picked up several customers this year that were doing end of line programming
Mhm.
and ran into exactly the problem I just described. Their code size grew,
Oh,
and
wow.
they had, more changes. And what we do, we can go, and we had an example of this earlier, 2 years ago.
Mhm.
We had an automotive customer. Remember when everyone had to build ventilators for COVID?
Yeah.
And it was
Mhm.
drop everything you're doing and go build a ventilator.
Right.
So we put in place a program that said, look, if you need to go do something for COVID, a ventilator or something else, DAIO will put you at the front of the line. We'll waive any of our expedite fees. Just come talk to us. We'll help you out.
Nice. Wow.
And so we had one customer that had a DAIO machine. They were building automotive electronics, and they needed to build ventilator electronics.
Right.
And so literally in 30 minutes, a customer could reconfigure the machine
Hmm.
to go from building automotive electronics to ventilator electronics.
That's
They
really,
did
yeah,
that by
yeah.
swapping out the adapters to target a different product and then putting in a different job into the computer to be programmed.
And the
So to your
adapters
point,
are just items that come with your machine, correct?
yeah, so remember
Adapt-
we talked about consumables earlier, that the adapters are boards that have sockets on them. And the
Yeah.
chips go into the sockets, and then the adapters connect to the programming engine. So for
Mhm.
example, a lot of semiconductors, they all have different footprints, right? If you look at the package, some are long and thin, some are square, some have
Right.
a lot of leads, some have balls on the bottom. I mean, they're all different.
Mhm. Mhm.
So what we have is the adapter allows for that chip diversity, if you will, to be connected directly to our programming engine across a broad range of semiconductors.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Got
my
it.
point earlier was, that customer could go from building automotive electronics to ventilator electronics in half an hour.
That's really neat. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And yeah, that's fantastic. So, and you guys, and Ben said, as far, oh, and another quick question: who are your competitors in this field? Who scares you? Who's like, oh man, or are you, or do you feel you're pretty much kind of like in your area,
Yeah.
because this is kind of like behind the curtains, kind of where you have a production, like a theater production, and people see the final,
Yeah. So
act and whatnot. But what's really cool is understanding the details, the costume, the stitcher, the designer, and builders of the set. And in this specific part of the production, how do you feel as far as, is there anybody that you go, well, they're kind of, they're colleagues of ours, right? They're in the market, so to speak. Or
yeah.
do you,
So
or how what's your what, yeah, that's
Tony, if you
yeah.
remember, I think I mentioned this earlier on. I started my career at Intel, and I was at Intel when Andy Grove was there, and he wrote a book called "Only the Paranoid Survive." So
Mhm.
there's no such thing as assuming all your competitors are going to be friendly. You got to keep an eye on everybody all the time.
Right.
We're the biggest company. We're the only publicly traded company doing pre-programming or chip level programming, I should say. So I have a number of
Mhm.
competitors from China.
Oh, okay.
We have one in the U.S., one in Europe, and you can they do a good job. We think we do a better
Okay.
job. We
Yeah,
think we
yeah, yeah.
offer a lot more value. And when you say, why do the auto companies want to buy from you? It's
Right.
not just doing a good job in programming, high quality. It's our service organization. We
No,
have
and your
customers on
stateside.
5
I mean,
continents.
right. And
Okay?
the bill, I hate to interrupt you, Tony, but real quickly to your point, and I don't want to be rude, but as far as Huawei is a good example of being out in, specifically in China under CCP
Yeah.
control. And you just said a bunch of Chinese companies. We're entering into a deglobalization kind of arena. So in that respect, you guys have a lot to gain, because quite frankly, the main blood vessel for China is the US economy. And whoever, that's kind of like, in my view, the ring that rules all is, if you have access to the American economy, then that kind of dissipates to everything
Yeah,
else.
it's an interesting point. I just have to point out, the government says we can't sell to Huawei, so we don't sell to Huawei. All right.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of other companies that there's on a list, and we check the list to make sure that we're okay there. But I think your point is, for 30 years we had a globalization model that was driving business. Right, find the low-cost production area, go build plants there, build stuff there, import it back to consumers globally, and keep going. But I think your point is very valid. We've entered a point where I don't think that globalization assumption is valid anymore.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing it with, the United States government putting out $50 billion of subsidies to incent semiconductor fabrication to come back to the U.S.
And you guys fall in that specific beautiful.
Well, yeah,
right?
we get helped by that, but there's also other things coming back around clean energy, other products that need to be built in the United States, and our manufacturing strategy supports that. We've had manufacturing in the United States for decades, and so if a customer says, "Hey, I want you to build my system in the U.S.," we can do that for them.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, we have to be ready. Remember, I said earlier, we have to be flexible. We have to be nimble.
Right.
Changing political environments is something we have to consider, and we have the flexibility to do that. We have the working capital to do that, and so that's something we have to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. No, even Chinese fabricators. I'm sorry. I'm done. Yeah.
Tony,
okay.
hate to cut you off. I love that. I let you go for a while because you're so knowledgeable about this area, but it is getting pretty late. We're over time. Anthony, I just want to close it off with one question from, thank you, Tony, so much. Just Matthew Winthrop just had one follow-up question, and we're going to end it there. Go ahead, Matthew.
Listen, I appreciate your time. Your PR guy's a good guy because he got in touch with me. I like the story. I sort of get it, but it really doesn't matter to me what kind of widget you're selling. I understand the value you're adding. Do me a favor. I want a 2-minute pitch from you, because I'm a retail broker, fair disclosure. I sell things and I invest in products and companies that I like. What I like about you guys is management's been there a while. Your Intel connection seems like your top brass, all owned stock. Seems like a good addressable market, but 7 million in revenue, I'm still trying to get my arms around. Tell me what's exciting. What gets you up in the morning? Give me a pitch on why in 2 or 3 years I'm going to look back and this thing's going to be really, wow, I was there early.
Sure. So when you talk to investors and they want to supplement their portfolio with a microcap, you want to be in a position for a company that is extremely well positioned to be where the market is going. We talked about automotive. We talked about the tripling of semiconductor content. We are already in automotive. We have over 250 systems in automotive. We're the global leader, and we have enormous operating leverage. So a little bit of growth goes a long way for DAIO. And I'll give you an example of that. Call it $25 million of revenue. Every $1 million of revenue brings down about 40 cents of operating income. Okay, and you go back, look at the numbers over a several year period, you'll see that ratio is pretty accurate. So as customers put more and more silicon content into cars, and it grows our revenue, we're able to bring that down to the bottom line at a very, very healthy ratio. Okay, so if you're a retail broker and you want to have something to add a little spice to your client's portfolio, my God, man, don't put everyone 100% into DAIO. We're too small. But if you want to add a microcap component to a portfolio to juice it up, make it a little interesting, think of it as pepper sauce, okay? It'll wake up the portfolio. You want to have a company that's in the right markets, that's got great operating leverage, that has $11 million of cash and no debt. So we don't need to go out and dilute anybody just to run the business. So that's where DAIO might be interesting to your client base.
That's a great pitch. I forgot. I have one more 30-second thing. I'm sorry, Ben. If I'm a manufacturer, automotive, wherever, I have a 7-year-old machine. Why haven't I had to upgrade that? Why do your machines last that long? Doesn't technology change quicker, faster, different types of chips, smaller?
Yeah,
chips?
but when you qualified that 7 years ago, you swore to your OEM that you wouldn't change a thing, and that's why they gave you the business.
Right. But doesn't your machine today work more efficiently than it did 7-8 years ago? Quicker, more output?
Oh, absolutely. The programmer is much faster. And the beautiful thing is we can actually let a customer run that 7-year-old job unmodified and at the same time upgrade to the latest technology in the same system so they can take full advantage of a programmer that's probably 10 times faster.
That's what I was looking for. I appreciate it. Back to Ben. Thank you, sir. You do
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Anthony, do you have time for one more?
I'm here for you, man.
All right. There's so much interest that keeps coming in. Julian had a very important question. Julian, take it away. You can unmute yourself there. All right. There he is. Go
Hi.
ahead.
So first of all, Ambrose, thank you. That was an incredibly informative interview, and well done, Ben. I'm not as erudite as Tony on all this, but if we could just nail Centrics, because for the past few years, that was always touted as the great white hope. It seems as though you're doing so many good things, you don't necessarily rely upon Centrics anymore. But Centrics is supposed to be the future, and I understand that IoT should need security. So what is it that's stopping Centrics being adopted? What is protecting IoT? What is protecting my fridge with the latest IoT, with the latest security device? What is protecting anything in my house, whether it's the mic or the camera? Why aren't people already panicking? And I mean, we've seen a lot of debate about security hacking. So if we're not using Centrics, what else is there out there that's delaying your adoption?
Well, that's a good question, Julian. And I think part of it is on us, right? We have to go figure out how to be much better at marketing and selling the technology so that customers can understand it. Once we've been able to get to customers where the light bulb goes on, they go, aha, I love it. Great. Give me one of these Centrics machines. But to your point, I think there's still a lot of demand out there and systems that are either not being secured or they're only being partially secured. Okay.
Partly secured means you mean enough to lull people into a false sense of security. What type of security?
Well, I was going to give a talk in Germany. I was going to call it Die drei kleine Schweine, the 3 little pigs. Okay. And so bear with me. You could have pig number 1 wanted to get his product to market, and he was behind, and so he cut some corners and didn't do any security. So that's the pig in the house of straw, okay? And he got hacked, and his firmware got corrupted, and he blew his time to market advantage, and so he got exited, I think is the appropriate term these days. So then a second pig said, wow, I don't want to do that. I want to apply maybe a software patch and a Band-Aid that'll sort of protect my firmware, but it won't really, matter too much because, it's better than that house of straw. So he built a house of wood, okay? And then a real strong hacker came in and compromised his firmware, and he had a denial of service attack and didn't even know it for a while, and his product never really took off. So then you had the third pig, okay? He saw all this and said, look, I want a strong hardware-based root of trust. I want to establish strong identity and authenticity in hardware. So I'm going to put an X509 certificate in every one of my microcontrollers or secure elements. And I'm going to do that using Centrics technology from DAIO. So now the hacker came and said, oh my gosh, everything's encrypted. This chip is protected. I can't hack into this. And so the wolf and the big hacker went on and found other targets. So that's really the story I would tell. The 3 little pigs as product managers of IoT devices Don't put a house of straw together. Don't put a house of wood together. Go with strong authentication, strong identity, and a hardware-based root of trust with DAIO and Centrics. And the people that understand what I'm talking about there, please come talk to me and we'll help you out.
Hey, thank you, Anthony, so much. Julian, thank you. We're going to do, whoever wants to follow up with Anthony, we'll make that possible. It looks like there's a lot of interest here. Just want to let people know, if you are not a VIP member, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can hop on over to StoryTrading.com and join us for free for 7 days. And then you can get access in real time to all these great CEO interviews we do. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at StoryTrading. And Anthony, thank you once again for your time. Thanks for going overtime. Really appreciate that.
Hey, Ben, really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. And thanks to everyone for joining tonight.
Thank you. Have a good night. And again, thank you, Jordan Darrow from Darrow & Associates and Matthew Winthrop. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Yep.